So after that brief introduction, we can quickly move ahead to the main book review session, which we're going to have on three books by Advocate Abdul Muqtadir. I'd invite you to please, I'd like to invite you to please take over from here.
Am I audible?
Yes,
Hello.
yes,
Okay.
you're
Okay.
audible.
Thank you, Sad, for giving me opportunity first. So, as Sad said that I have to review three books, and all of you probably know that all those three books. One of the book that is one is that Ambedkar's Preamble. Second is the book which I am going to review is the Madhav Khosla's India's founding movement, and third book which I'm gonna review is the 16 Stormy Days. So all three books somehow deal with the only one idea, that is the idea of a constitution. So in that sense, like the first book, Ambedkar's Preamble, is a sort of inquisitive book which is dealt with the how Ambedkar relation with the formulation or the drafting of the preamble. And the second book, that is the Madhav Khosla's book, is the it is sort of like inquiry into what were the India's founding moment at that time. Whole constitution was being drafted or enacted at that time. And the third book, that is the 16 Stormy Days, is the after the drafting of the constitution, which already came into the existence, which was enacted in the year like 26th January 1950. Thereafter, the incumbent government, that is the Nehru's government, how it dealt with the constitution, what were the relationship of the Nehru's government with the constitution, and all those things. So, and in fact, the one of the best thing about all three books is that one, we can say that the 16 Stormy Days is the book which is sort of like a right side of writer who is coming and writing that one. So sort of Ambedkar Preamble is the Aakash Singh Rathore. Seems look like a is a sort of like centrist Dalit understanding is there. And the Madhav Khosla is the sort of very academic book which is some looks like the left sort of thing. So in a way that all these three books give some sort of very good idea in terms of the founding movement of India. So I think bit by bit I take the books and all. What I'm just thinking is that because I think I have a half an hour now, it's 3:15. So I just give you some sort of over review on the India's constitutional moments. For example, like all we know that this is the 15th August 1947 we got the freedom, but before the 47 is already in the year 1946, the under the very cabinet mission plan, the Constitution Assembly was already sitting and started deliberating on the how the constitution should be. Then meanwhile the this Independence Day happened, this partitions takes place. Thereafter the Constitution Assembly goes on to frame the constitution, and on 26th November 1949, that is the day like we usually right now we call it as a sort of like Constitution Day. Sometime it is to be called as a law day. Some 1 year back it has been started be calling as the Constitution Day. So on that day the Constitution Assembly adopted the constitution. So and it came into operation only in the month of January, that is 26th 1 1950, like we usually call it as a Republic Day. So this independence is the sort of like a partition one, and the 26th of January is the Republic Day when the constitution came into existence. So we owe our freedoms, or we in a sense like we owe our liberty, or we owe sort of like right to life and all those constitutional ideas to all that happened in the Constituent Assembly that enacted the constitution. So as of all we know, okay, like constitution consists of number of things and all, but we also know there's something called the preamble. And preamble which sort of encapsulates some very basic idea of constitution. So the first book which under review, that is this book, Ambedkar's Preamble, that is by Aakash Singh Rathore. It's a very good book on the understand to know the mind of the Ambedkar. And as we all know, the Ambedkar was the one of the person who is the chief architect of the constitution. He was the somebody who was the chairman of the drafting committee, and he was sort of like a window between the drafting committee and the constituent assembly, which used to discuss all those drafts and all those clauses and all. So in fact, the if we look at the credentials of the writer, that is the Aakash Singh Rathore, Aakash Singh, Aakash Singh is the one of the editor of the a new series which has come, which is being published by the Penguin. That is something called Rethinking India, which is consisted of some 14 volumes. So he's the one of the editor of that volume, and that series is bringing some very good books. One of the book is this Some Ideas of India, which is I think already Syed Hamruddin has reviewed in some 3 or 4 meeting back. So Aakash Singh Rathore has a very genuine, like he's a one of the writer, and is sort of like a intellectual at the horizon. And Aakash Singh Rathore has also been like he doesn't, like if you read his biography and all, he doesn't look like a sort of classic writer. He has, for example, I was just reading about his Wikipedia. He even participate in some cycling, cyclothon and something like that. So I have rarely come across a writer who is in the active sports, is doing some athletics. At the same time, he's producing some very good books also. So in a sense, like this Aakash Singh Rathore is a new discovery for me, both in terms of his writing and in terms of his daily life and all. So this book, as I said, is dealt with the preamble. And preamble, like all we know that preamble has those some very grand ideas, like we define the constitution, like we usually call this as a justice, that very idea of liberty and the very idea of equality and the fraternity. So the book goes into the fact that who is the author of this preamble. And in his introduction, he discuss on some of the 4 possible answer to that one, because there is no draft or the minutes of meeting which are available to show that who is exactly writer of the preamble. But author tries to show that the actual writer is the Ambedkar, and he tries to convincingly answer that query. In fact, while answering this question whether the Ambedkar was the actual writer of the preamble or not, he goes into the Ambedkar's life, he goes into the Ambedkar writing, he goes into the Ambedkar understanding of politics, he goes into the upbringing of the Ambedkar. In fact, he goes into the intellectual journey of the Ambedkar. So that way, it's not just a book which deals with the question of preamble authorship. It also deals with the all those idea of justice, liberty, fraternity, and equality, and all those things. And in fact, in the introduction, and there is a, like I said, as I said that before the independence happened, the already under the cabinet mission plan, the Constituent Assembly was already constituted, and some in the, I think in the month of October, no, not in the month of October. In the month of December 13 12 1946, the Jawaharlal Nehru has put the something called the aims and objective of resolution, and he tables those aims and objective of resolution. So that aims and object of that particular Constituent Assembly debate, he puts a very elaborated that resolution is there, and in fact that also deals with the same idea of the preamble. So the author says that in the popular understanding, basically in a UPSC setup, like where people are preparing for the Indian polity, everybody thinks that the Jawaharlal Nehru is the sort of writer of the preamble, but he shows that the Nehru was not the writer; is actually Ambedkar is the writer. And in fact, while dealing with all those ideas of preamble and all those things, he dealt with those four words, which, that is justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. Along with that, he also discussed the very idea of the dignity and the idea of the nation as a nation. So one of the interesting chapter, like which I read, is the question of the nation, and probably everybody has a very different understanding. Like as a reader, like probably with my own understanding of the some constitutional ideas and something like that. So what I felt new in the book is that one, the idea, all that idea of justice, liberty, fraternity, equality, along with that dignity and nation. So in every concept, and writer tries to show that it's the not only intellectual experience of the Ambedkar which is manifested in those ideas, not only his life also. For example, he discussed about the question of dignity, how Ambedkar being a untouchable, being a Dalit, how those ideas, how that lived reality has affected him a lot, and how he came with all those things. So I think as a reader, as a just a lay reader who doesn't have constitutional understanding, for example, who have not read the what is constitution and all, if somebody is reading first book, it's just a sort of like introduction to the constitution. So for them also this books is a very good book, and I recommend to all the persons who are the viewers of this particular program. So this book gives a very good understanding of the all these things which are happening. And like for example, recent times there has been a very question of preamble. People are trying to understand the constitution, and the people are trying to answer their questions and answer their lot of other issues and all through the constitution. So for all of them, this book is going to be a revealing one. In fact, at the same time, it gives the idea of the constitution, and it also gives the idea of Ambedkar as a philosopher, Ambedkar as a politician, at the same time, Ambedkar as a draftsman. So Ambedkar as a draftsman, you will come to know how he has been such a person, and all his life has been affected in the framing of the constitution. In fact, Ambedkar is the only one person in the Constitution Assembly debate, in fact, who rarely been absent in the drafting committee meetings. There are some other members, like 9 members were there in the drafting committee. So all used to be, somebody used to, for some pretext they are absent, but Ambedkar was never absent there. So it shows that the Ambedkar's sort of concern for the future constitution, where he was seeing that the citizens will have this, will cherish the idea of justice, cherish the idea of liberty, cherish the idea of equality, fraternity, and the same time there is a dignity and other things. So I think this will suffice the, and this will probably this sort of introduction will give a brief idea, and I think a lot of people might get the, in order to read much more, I think better you have to buy this book and read this one. It's a very wonderful book to go on. So moving to the second book, and the second book is the India's founding moment by Madhav Khosla. And Madhav Khosla is the I think he's upcoming, not upcoming. He's already on the horizon. He's the one who is the one of the one of the best intellectual, which are in the like ages of 30s to 45 plus. I don't know how much, what is his age, but he's a very young scholar. And by reading this book, for me it was like a very humbling experience, in a sense like that. Madhav Khosla has brought many ideas in this book, and even like, for example, first book, that is the Ambedkar Preamble, I was just like going fast, like I was like, okay, this like every book has, it gives you some sort of pace. Some books give a pace like, okay, you just move on like anything, and some books ask you to, okay, stop and now read it again, try to understand, sort of like digest the ideas and all. So after a long time, I read a book where like the writer was asking me to, okay, Muqtadir, now stop, now just think of it, move on. So see, India's founding movement was that kind of thing, like it gave me the like it put me a lot of clarity, one thing, and at the same time it has introduced me some very new vocabulary, and it tries to crystallize a lot of the founding moments of India. So one thing is this one, like probably the like 15th August is one of the founding moment, in a sense like territorially India came into existence. But the territory was not the question. The question was that what kind of India we want to have, how the when the colonialist has left the India, how we ourselves want to self rule, how we deal with ourselves, and all those questions. So probably like 15th August is a moment, in a sense that which has granted us a sort of territory, but the ideas which will govern us, in a sense like how we deal with the government, how will be the how things will be there, for example, what kind of governments we will have, what kind of democracy we will have, something like what kind of representations we are looking at, that one. These are the some very questions that we need to answer. So in fact, as like in the first book I mentioned that the Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru, when he tabled that aims and objective or sort of resolution. So at that time there was a discussion, like there's a discussion on this sovereignty, uh, and that very concept of sovereignty had irked this princely state. Like they were very against the idea of the sovereignty. So sovereignty, in a sense that the princely state, they thought, they presume or presuppose that the sovereignty will always lies with the princely states and the princess, in a sense like a Raja Maharaja. But democracy has altered that very idea of sovereignty. It says, okay, no, sovereignty now, it will not be a bastion of some princes or some feudal lords or something like that, that will be handed over to a people. So there were some, like sovereignty was the one of the question that dealt in the objective resolutions and all those things. So those are the like found movements where there, where the India's foundation were being built up. For example, this book has the some of the three sections. And because this is very one book which I felt कि भाई I have to stop and read it. So I felt like it better I go through the some of the sections, some of the books, the scheme of that book. The book has dealt with the, some three ideas. That is the grammar of constitutionalism, and the second was the location of power, and third one is the identity and representation. So see, first of all, that grammar of constitutionalism has dealt with some of the basic ideas on the what kind of constitution, whether we wanted the unwritten constitution or the written constitution. For that, the Khosla has referred to as a codification of the constitution. Then the location of power is also one of the chapter. Like for example, I have made some of the notes. I think it's better if I refer to those notes and all to give some more clarity on that point. Um, so then there is a question of location of the power, where the power resides, and because the question of power was the pertinent question, there was a like for example, before the independence, there was a sort of fight between the Muslim League and the Congress that whether they wanted a strong center or the strong provinces. The Muslim League and people were saying that no, we want a strong provinces and very loose, very less sort of powerless sort of center. But that after this particular 15th August 1947, that question is become has had become immaterial, and ultimately Constitutional Assembly thought like India needs to have a very strong center. For example, now we have a strong center, like now the center has the lot of say in many things. So so that question has been asked in that one, location of the power. And in identity and representations, the question what sort of like whether there should be a communal representation, whether there should be a separate electorate, how to deal with the question of caste and all those things. So the book has dealt with very basic ideas. For example, it has in the introduction part, it has dealt with the question of universal adult suffrage. Like for example, Western society, they had given the graded sort of like gradually they started giving the power of vote to persons. Like for example, they started giving first the well-off people, and slowly, in fact, the women got later off. So but India was not like that. India, its initial in its inception, in a sense, like at the birth only, India is a democracy. It has given the adult suffrage. So and for that, in fact, it deals with the how Ambedkar saw that um, the universal adult suffrage cannot be a battle. Like there should be, there's no discussion on that one. There's nothing can be done about that one. It's a sort of like a sign con on that should be like that is the inevitable thing. India wanted to have that, but a lot of people had argued that the India being a very illiterate, it is a very young democracy, not a, in fact not an young democracy, just a democracy just started to be there. So how it can have citizens like who were under the colonialism, who were the subjects till 15th August 1947, subject of the Queen, now who have become a citizen on their own, whether they are capable of exercising those right to vote sort of power. So the writer suggests that these are the some of the things uh, which were the founding moment, in a sense, like India tried to have it, and the and it was the India's all credit goes to the Constituent Assembly debate, which could think of universal adult suffrage. And in terms of grammar of constitutionalism and all those things, book has dealt with very pertinent questions. Like for example, I said that codification, that is the written constitution, whether why India needed the written constitution. Then the book dealt with the I'm like, it has introduced the some like, for example, as a reader to me, like I got some very new words to see that, and it has given me much more conceptual clarity in terms of the constitution also. For example, it has it dealt with the idea of for example, India was the one of the few, like India did have something called the directive principles. Like, now we have a directive principle that the state will do these kind of duties and all. At the same time, we had the fundamental rights. So India, like, tried to have as much as the possible that director principle were sort of like tasked to the sort of leading task to the government, how they should deal with the coming days, how they should frame their policies and all. So then the very idea of fundamental rights was that one. Then it has discussed the very concept called the due process of the law. And due process of the law has its own checkered history in India. Even though I'm like, if I'm sort of drifting from the book also, but the due process has been subject to the number of questions and all. And there is ultimately India, like BN Rao is another one of the prominent member of the constitution drafting committee, who was the sort of like a constitutional advisor to the whole drafting committee and all. He had gone to the America and he had met some of the judges over there. So judge had advised him to not to have a due process clause. So ultimately, India has something called the procedure established by the law. It's the only procedure clause it has. So, but and what is the difference between the procedure and the due process was that one? Yeah, because if there is a India had started to have only procedure clause, and the procedure clause will give a very less power to the judiciary to review the action of the government. The judiciary had the only one thing, that if anything has been done by the government, the judiciary has to see that whether there is a law. If there is a law, the judiciary can't do anything about that law. But what happens in the due process, the judiciary first look at whether there is a law is there or not. If answer is yes, then the government see, the judiciary see that whether that law is the properly framed, whether it is a just, it is a proper one, as a reasonable one or not. So in a way, in due process, what is happening is that the judiciary has a power to review the intention of the government also. But in the procedural clause, the judiciary has no such power. It just need to see whether law is there or not. If the law is there, judiciary cannot reprimand the government. It cannot give sort of cannot grant some prayer to a petitioner. If there is a no law, then only in the procedure law, that procedure established in that process, the government, the judiciary can give some sort of prayer or some sort of solution to that problem. So India initially chose to have a procedural clause, not a due process clause. So that was the one of the founding moment according to the Madhav, and that is his right also. Because ultimately what happens, initially we didn't have the this due process clause. Ultimately, in a very famous case called the Menika Gandhi case and all, in that what happened, that judiciary gets brings the due process clause in the constitution. Even though bare reading of the constitution shows that we don't have a due process clause, but after the Menika Gandhi happened, then Menika Gandhi happens after the emergency. So emergency has shown some problems, sort of some constitutional silence in the text. Ultimately the court has come with the idea of all those things. So now we have a due process clause. So these are the some of the ideas that Madhav Khosla dealt with in the book, and this is a very tremendous book. And it shows the depth of the Madhav Khosla's understanding, and it shows that kind of labor he has put into that one. And it's a book, and I say that it's a book probably a lay reader will have a hard time to read it fast. Even a lawyer also will have a hard time to read it fast. In fact, a lawyer who is doing in a constitutional law matter, probably he will be having a not hard time. He will be enjoying a lot of things there. But other than the constitutional lawyer, all other people, for them, it will be a very sort of book where it will use the new ideas. It will empower the reader with the new vocabulary, with the new understanding of the moment, founding moments. That is the question. Those queries will be answered. I think now I will move to the third book, that is the 16 Stormy Days by Tripurdaman Singh. And he's also a very young guy, like he's like my age, probably born in the 80s, 88, and done very fabulous job. And book, the title is 16 Stormy Days, and also probably you need a that sort of stormy speed to read also, because book is vividly written, and it has put lot of scenes which are graphical scenes which are available, how that uh, like how it shows the bare bones of the Nehru. In fact, this book is written in a sense like to show that how, in fact, it like probably some might have a very idealistic understanding of Nehru and all. By reading that book, that idealistic understanding gets reduced in a sense like, okay, Nehru is also turned to sort of like dictator, but he never turned to a dictator. But there's those days this books deals with that one. It used the glimpses of the Nehru, like who probably a sort of dictator who, but only he was a dictator in a sense like he used the constitutional method, but whether those constitutional proprietary was there or not, those the question that will answer this book. And these books deal with the one of the very significant event of the constitutional history, that is the first amendment of the constitution. Now, like all of us know that there's something called constitution, there's something called the process of amendment. A government do plays with the constitution, they come up with some ideas in that one. So Nehru also did the same thing, and this is the first amendment happened. And happened in a sense like the constitution came into existence on the date of 26 January 1950, and the second amendment takes place. I will just look at the date. Second amendment, it even get passed on the 2nd June 1961. So just like January to January 12, another either 6 months, like within the 18 months, the constitution was changed. And another thing is that still the Nehru government was the interim government. The first election has not taken place, and first election had to be taken place. Before, the government was the interim government. Whether that government has the popular mandate or not, those are different questions. So still the government did not have a popular mandate, and it went on to do the constitutional amendments. Now that is the end that has happened. But what are the factors that led to do all these things? See, and like I will just take another 7 to 8 minutes. The constitution, there's already we have a right to free speech and all those things, right to property, many things were there. Ultimately the Congress had some very pet projects of social engineering, social evolution, many things. And in that one, they had one of the prime, their pet project was the zamindari abolition. That is like lot of people who were like feudal lords, and they wanted to uh, kill that feudalism in a sense, like they didn't want to have any zamindaris and all. So that was like sort of socialistic understanding which Nehru had. So now, because the constitution had the right to property as one of the fundamental right, and the zamindars who own the property, so any legislation which Nehru and the Congress party at that time, which sort of like held sway over the all over India, so they wanted to abolish the zamindari. So in order to abolish that one, they need to bring a law, and they were bringing in the law, but that were challenged before the judiciary. And the judiciary, by looking at the right to property as the fundamental right, they were striking all those laws and all. So what was happening is that the Nehruvian idea was being stopped by the judiciary, by the citizen, by using the right to property as the one of the prime sort of like a sword sort of thing. So that was like sort of for the Nehru, it was like a dead end. So Nehru didn't have any other thing to do that one. So then at the same time, there are a lot of organization, there are a lot of people from the right and the left who were in the print, who were in the press, they were criticizing the Nehru like anything. So every time they criticize the government tries to use the some detentions and all, political detention that used to take place. So a lot of people were put into jail as a political prisoners. So when the constitution came on, that is 26 1 1950, so people started using the right to free speech as another sword to defend their right to speech. Whatever they want to say, the government can't do anything. So ultimately, due to which that one lot of detentions which were taken place of the and all those people, that cannot be held, and the judiciary simply releasing them. So many things like these things were happening. And another thing which happened in the Tamil Nadu, that is in the Madras at that time, the Madras was the first state after the constitution which brought the reservation. And due to the reservation, the lot of there was a reservation which was like a very strict reservation they had brought. That was again challenged before the Madras High Court. Again, that was also struck due to the Article 15 and Article 29. So ultimately, what was happening is that the Nehruvians' idea of abolition of zamindari, the Nehru, who was turning to be a dictator, sort of like who had the absolute sort of power. So he was not ready to listen a lot of criticisms of the government and many things. So, and because the right to free speech was giving them that power to criticize the government. So these things, zamindari thing, and in fact, there's another thing
Thank you.
called the
Thank
nationalization
you.
of the lot of
We
trades
actually
and
have a
all.
lot of
So
questions that have come in the
zamindari
chat
one, second is
regarding
the
the discussion that we're having.
nationalization,
Can you please take a look at
third
them
is
and
the
you can respond to
free
those?
speech, fourth is the reservation, and these will the judiciary was for them is a sort of like a blocking thing which is happening. It was had become the wall. So in order to solve these issues, in order to have the Congress say in the sort of molding the India, so the Nehru came with the idea of amendment of the constitution, and and that amendment was simply rushed through within those 16 or 18 days. And those 16 stormy days, the title referred to those 16 days that happened in the parliament when the first amendment was stable, and later it was enacted, it was passed and all. So in those stormy days, there was a lot of discussion took place between the Nehru and the SP Mukherjee and Naziruddin Ahmad, some other people who have said a lot of things against the Nehru, and all those things happened and all. So these books will give a working of the constitution and the sort of loopholes in the constitution, not loopholes in the constitution, but the loophole in the Congress government which was not able to cultivate the some convention and wait and try to evolve those constitutional schemes. So it failed to do so. So ultimately these things were happened, and due to which the constitution amendment was taken place. This is the very wonderful book to understand the what went through those first constitutional amendment happened. So I think with this remark, I can say that this book can be read by anybody. Anybody can read it, both right, left, center, whatever want. It's a very interesting book to read. Uh, I think with this, I conclude my remarks on the three books. The Shoaib's question is this one, that in the constitution we have something called the list. Like there's a union list, there is a state list, and there's a concurrent list. So that was the sort of structures that was in order to limit the power of the center and define the power of the center, at the same time define the power of the state, and what are the subjects they can have their say and all. So in those are the that seventh schedule is the schedule where those lists are there. So now the question of the show is that one, center power. It seems that center is becoming more and more powerful since independence, as we see subjects under union list and concurrent list have increased. Subject and the state list have decreased in the seventh schedule. It is not that affecting federal structure of the our constitution. See, when in fact one very famous book called The Working of Indian Constitution by Graville Austin, he refers the Indian federalism sort of like a quasi federalism. In a sense, like we don't have a US kind of federalism. We are very quasi sort of like it seems like a federal, but India has a very strong center in terms of like emergency clauses. In fact, even the concurrent list, it gives the lot of power to the center in terms of the something called the Article 254. So that gives the power to the center, residuary power. And if the concurrent list, if something happened, if there is there's one subject within the concurrent list, if the state also enacted some law on that one, and even the center has enacted some law on that one, at that time only center prevails. In a sense like that, Indian federal structure is not a purely federal structure. So we are the quasi federal structure. And now, because the like in the initial days of the our democracy, when the central government and the state governments are the same, and the Nehru had sort of power over the party, so center had become the powerful. The same thing happening right now also. The BJP is in the power, and a lot of other states are under the control of the BJP, and for that reason we see that the center has become more powerful. In a sense, like the federal structure is the not purely structure, so it's a quasi only. So you can say that okay, our federal structure got affected, but initially also we didn't have the proper federal structure to so that it got affected. It's already a quasi one. I think that will answer the Shoaib's thing. Should I move to next question? Hello.
Yes, please. Okay.
Okay. Then next question is that Nehru may have influenced the parliament through pursuit. The others are the comments. Like I think there's only one question. Hamruddin's question is that how is the judicial accountability taken care of? What does the book says about the challenge of independent judiciary? See, independent judiciary, for example, 16 Stormy days. If you read that book one, you will come across that judiciary is a very independent judiciary. So it has read the constitution in a way that has to be read. It has not tilted or not thought of going against or going in favor of the government. In number of the judgment, the court has said that no, we are just doing our constitutional duty of by reading the law as it should be read. So judicial accountability is already taken care of, but only question is that how that independence of judiciary has been exercised by the judiciary. But as far as the accountability is concerned, is that one, like it's always we say that Supreme Court is like sort of final, not because it's like infallible, like their famous thing goes on. So there is no way that accountability, like a lot of government tried to make the judiciary as accountable, but that has been stopped by the judiciary itself. For example, in the Modi's first government, the government has brought the something called NGAC, National Judicial Accountability Act, so commission. So through which they wanted to change the whole idea of the judges appointment. That was sort of blocked by the judiciary. So as for the judicial accountability, no, like it's only the judiciary has to answer for itself. But as far as the independence of judiciary is concerned, the judiciary is far independent. But the only question is that who are manning the judiciary, whether they want to be independent or not.
Thank you.
That I think 2 questions only.
Yeah. At this point, if anyone else has any further comments, I think Muqtadir bhai, from your side, if you mute your mic, then my voice won't echo. I think that's some problem is happening. Okay, so if anyone else has any further comments or anything to add in this discussion, please feel free to do so. You can use your audio or you can type in the chat. I think we've had one more question in the chat box now. So after this point, we can move on to the next session. So
okay, I think Bilal Khan, Bilal. Okay. The question is that how relevant the constitutional question when constitutional legitimacy is being increasingly subverted? To answer, see, nobody is I feel that nobody is asking the constitutional legitimacy in a sense like constitution not supreme. Every government as a lip service or intentionally unintentionally in back door or front door, they have to say that they are go by the constitution. But constitutional questions are the questions that has to be questioned, because the second book, that is the Madhav Khosla's book, which sort of give the idea that we wanted to have a written constitution just to sort of formalize or uniformalize the idea of thinking and many things on that one. So till today also the constitutional questions have pertinent value, and in a sense without looking into constitutional question, there cannot be the answer to the whether legality illegality of that particular act. So a lot of people probably asking the constitutional legitimacy. In fact, the 16 Stormy days is also one of the book which dealt with the initial constitutional legitimacy. For example, Nehru says in that book, the author quote also, the Nehru writes a letter, I think, to the Odisha chief minister or the Tamil Nadu chief minister, I'm just forgetting. He said that we need to change the constitution in order to realize the zamindari abolition and all other ideas. So this constitutional legitimacy, in a sense, like every majority in government tries to have its own ideas, and only in order to limit that power, it's I think only constitutional questions only will answer those issues and all. I think constitutional questions are pertinent. It will have a relevance. Anyhow, it has probably relevance will be less, more and all, but without that, nothing could be answered. I think that's probably is from my side.